Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching Boom, the Political Vigilante. Here comes some hot, fresh truth, ladies and gentlemen. We've talked a lot on this show about how neoliberal policies and the ruling elites and the central banks have basically destroyed a lot of global economies. America's getting destroyed right now as we speak. Record inflation. And also, I've talked about how Bitcoin, not crypto, Bitcoin is separate from the altcoins. You really have to understand that. I have a whole Bitcoin playlist. I suggest you learn about it. And Bitcoin specifically doesn't have a CEO that can be arrested or offices that can be raided. It lives on the blockchain. There's only 21 million that will ever be mined. Every 4 years, there's a halving. And so I think it's going to become the world's reserve currency. And El Salvador 2 years ago made it, President Bukele made it their currency, meaning it requires every store, restaurant, hotel, business, whatever, gym to accept Bitcoin as it would regular fiat currency. So what's happened as a result of that? It's pulled El Salvador, and he locked up all of their criminals. So they're one of the safest countries in Latin America, and they are paying off their debt. But before I get to that, I want to show you this is what the alternative looks like. Record inflation in Argentina introduces a 2,000 peso banknote. It's worth about $4. Central bank put new 2,000 peso notes into circulation. Inflation over 100% is wiping out the value of peso notes. They have 100% inflation. I just did a show in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. And after the show, I spoke to these two women. One was from Germany and one was from Argentina. The woman from Argentina was like, oh, we have record inflation too, Graham. It's not just the United States. And the woman from Germany was like, yeah, NATO's crazy. All anyone in Germany is talking about back home is the war, and they're blaming Russia for everything. And they don't want to take responsibility for the United States and NATO causing this problem. And these two women basically had fled their countries to get to Mexico because they were tired of the craziness. I mean, 100% inflation? That's Argentina. I mean, they have like 20-some% inflation in Pakistan. I mean, this is third world country kind of crazy stuff, but it's happening all over the place. It's not just third world countries now. I mean, look, Argentina is worse than Pakistan. I mean, this is what happened in Greece years ago. And we're seeing inflation in the States. It'll only get worse. If the banks start collapsing, the Federal Reserve will bail them out and print more money, which will spike inflation. It's insane. It's really like this just happened. So now the population has to pay, and what this means is this, like, you know, a gallon of milk is like, you know, $30 or something like that. I mean, this is insane. But here's what's happening. I want to show you. This is what's happening I want to go into the details of what's happening in El Salvador. This is the opposite, right? So that's what's going on in Argentina. In basically the same hemisphere. Well, El Salvador is Central America, Argentina is South America. So this is what's going on. This came out about a month ago. El Salvador's Bitcoin boom. This is in Yahoo Finance. And the American mainstream media, which is backed by the central banks, has been trying to say El Salvador's Bitcoin, it's going to fail. Bukele's nuts. How the world's first crypto nation's big bet is stabilizing its economy, proving critics wrong, and paying back its debt. All right, this is from about a month ago, a little over a month ago, when El Salvador President Bukele made the controversial decision to make Bitcoin legal tender in its country. Many people were skeptical and concerned about the potential risks, right? He announced on Twitter the country would purchase 1 Bitcoin each day starting November 18th. How is that going in 2023? According to Treasury Minister Alejandro Zelaya, the government has successfully repaid one of two outstanding $800 million bonds. They're a country paying their debts off, which has forced the IMF, which is a corrupt organization, to give them a higher bond rating. So basically, countries have a credit score the way you and I would have a credit score. And they had a low credit score because they had all this debt. They're paying those bonds off because they're buying one Bitcoin a day. The government is taking Bitcoin. I'm sure they're allowing people to pay their taxes in Bitcoin. Zelaya announced the news on Twitter January 23rd, highlighting the government's commitment to meeting its debt obligations and proving the skeptics wrong. Bukele, the president, tweeted, "Well, we just paid in full $800 million plus interest, but of course, almost no one is covering the story." Exactly. It's in Yahoo Finance, which is pretty buried. This wasn't like the leading story on CNN or Fox. It should be. But no, we're going to talk about how we're going to give Ukraine another $375 million, but we don't have money for veterans or student debt or Medicare for all or regular American citizens. We don't have money for homelessness. We don't have money for any of that, but we always got money for war. Because if we tell the story of what is happening in El Salvador, that's going to make Americans go, why aren't we doing that? You know what else should be in the news? This happened about 3 years ago. The city of Miami started accepting Bitcoin for people to pay off their parking tickets or their whatever local services. I covered on the show how the Houston Fire Department's pension fund converted about 10% of its pension, which was several, like $10 or $20 million, if I'm not mistaken, into Bitcoin. There's all these Bitcoin bubbles popping up. A Bitcoin bubble is basically like a little city or town or area where everyone is just starting to use Bitcoin. It hasn't been made national law. Like El Salvador is currently the only country where it's a national law. There's Bitcoin bubbles in little towns in El Salvador, in Costa Rica, which is like 2 countries down the coast, south of El Salvador, and then Guatemala, which I believe shares a border with El Salvador. There's an island, I think, in the Philippines. There's countries in Africa that are doing these little Bitcoin bubbles. Excuse me. And it's changing these little local economies. Because one of the things we've learned from Bitcoin is there's about 2.5 to 3 billion people in the world that don't have access to traditional banking, but they all have a smartphone. And so they're using Bitcoin and they're getting pulled out of poverty. It's not just pulling the El Salvadorian government out of poverty and out of debt. El Salvadorian regular citizens, if you're some little shopkeeper, you're accepting Bitcoin now. The government still owes $367 million plus interest on an additional bond set to mature in 2025, but the successful repayment of the 23 bond is a positive sign. I'd say, hey man, you owe us, what would end up being $1.1 billion. And here's 800 million of it just to, all right. I'll take that. What initially started as a largely controversial may be paying off as Bitcoin and many aspects of the blockchain-based asset market have began to rebound. Some of the NFT projects, as reported by GameStop's Corp, NFT's marketplace, some NFT projects have had seen spikes of 21,000%. Oh my God. So the Chivo wallet, which was created by the government of El Salvador, said 2.2 million Salvadorians were onboarded in just 1 month. That's a nation of 6.5 million people. So 30% of the country got on board with the Bitcoin wallet thing in a month. Okay. When it became the country's legal tender, which was in September of 2021. To encourage adoption, every user who successfully downloaded the app immediately received $30 in Bitcoin. By early 2022, about half of Salvadorians had the app. That was as of a year ago, a little over a year ago. The International Monetary Fund recently issued a statement on El Salvador's decision to accept Bitcoin as legal tender, cautioning against potential risk. We don't want everybody to get this crazy idea that you can be out of debt and your citizenry can all have money and prosperity, and we don't want that. The IMF, which is basically like a mob loan shark on the international stage, forces countries to take money. It's used. The IMF is used as sanctioning. We saw this when the IMF threatened to pull a 500. I think it was a $500 million loan to Ecuador. They were going to pull that money unless Ecuador gave up Julian Assange when Assange was at the Ecuadorian embassy in England. That's the kind of business. That's how the IMF plays ball. So when they're like, I don't know about Bitcoin, that's a reason for me to go, oh, I should buy more Bitcoin because the IMF doesn't like it. Then I like it. According to the statement, crypto markets are still largely speculative and unpredictable, sure, in nature, and should be approached with caution, right? The IMF, this is why I love when this is so funny. The IMF also highlighted the importance of transparency when dealing with cryptocurrency, which Bitcoin is the most transparent because it lives on the blockchain, which is a open source tech. We can all see. You can see what the El Salvadorian government is doing with its Bitcoin. They can't hide it. They can't have a black budget for its military the way the United States does. Because if the El Salvadorian government is paying its military with Bitcoin, that'll be on the blockchain and they cannot hide that. Ensure they remain compliant with anti-money laundering laws and regulations that advised El Salvador to develop effective regulatory framework, blah, 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 right? Because it's easier to launder money with fiat currency than it is with cryptocurrency. Remember when they hijacked that pipeline? They hacked that pipeline last year. You know how they caught the hackers? Because they used Bitcoin. They found their Bitcoin wallet, and that's how they caught them, because it is so open sourced. El Salvador, not deterred by the IMF's nonsense. In January, its Congress approved a digital security law, paving the way for the country to raise funds through the issuance of the world's first sovereign blockchain bond. Wow. The law allows for the use of blockchain technology in the issuance, trading, and clearing of securities, enabling greater efficiency and transparency in the process. The additional step forward for the country could potentially attract investment from tech-savvy investors looking for new opportunities in the crypto market. While the U.S. market faces uncertainty around banking and general decline in the U.S. equities, El Salvador's bet looks to be paying off. While El Salvador began buying Bitcoin at a significant premium to the current price, they also announced a purchase of 80 Bitcoin at a price around 19,000, mark of July 22. They've also committed to purchasing 1 Bitcoin per day every day since November 22. Roughly 126 days have passed since since then, meaning the company is still pouring millions into digital currency despite. So they bought a bunch of Bitcoin back in the fall when the FTX thing had brought the price down to like 16,000. So that already that is almost doubled. Wow. So, I mean, Yahoo Finance is saying that, but you notice how they keep that very hidden? This should have been like front page news on all of the major media outlets, but they're deliberately not talking about what's happening in El Salvador. And when if you've watched anything and learned anything from watching this show, when the media deliberately doesn't talk about something, you have to ask a question. I'm not one of these people that's like, everything they say is fake news and a lie. Sometimes they flat out lie, absolutely. But it's always how they frame the news. And what you have to look for is, what are they not talking about? They're talking about this. So this is on Yahoo Finance. This isn't on like the World Socialist website. This is Yahoo Finance is saying this is working out. And when the president goes on Twitter and says, we just paid off $800 million in debt, that's big. So we'll keep following this. Argentina is in record inflation. America's going into record inflation. And you have people like Liz Warren going, Bitcoin's bad business for everybody. I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm paid by the big banks. So it's something to think about. I'm not giving you financial advice. Do your own financial situation, but I would personally advise 5 to 10% of my assets into Bitcoin, because when the regular banks go belly up, you're still going to have Bitcoin. And more countries are going to be adopting this. I said this when El Salvador passed this law 2 years ago. I said this will be the first domino. And all these other countries are going to start to adopt it. They're going to look at their neighbor. They're going to look at El Salvador and go, wait a minute. They used to have awful crime. It's gone. They used to have poverty. That's gone. That country used to be in debt. It's gone. They used to not have money. Now they're building projects. They're building roads and stuff. They're going to just see this, and people are going to go, hey man, I just drove across the border to El Salvador and it's so much better there. We need to do that. It's going to happen. Brazil is starting to talk about adopting digital currency. Brazil is part of BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They've all gotten together, and that's almost half the world's population is those countries, and said, we're done using the US dollar. The United States could convert to Bitcoin quite effectively. The United States government is one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin. It seized something like 180,000 full Bitcoin from criminals and people that they just felt as a threat. So I would tell you, it is the single greatest opportunity for regular people. You can buy as little as $10 worth of Bitcoin. If you don't want to buy it, that's fine. Whether you buy it or not doesn't affect me at all, because big money's coming into it. And El Salvador is not going to be the last country to adopt Bitcoin. I say this as somebody who had my home taken away from the banks at both Bush and Obama gave the banks money to take mine and 6 million other Americans' homes away from us. And so I've been screwed over by the system. So I'm looking for any way to be out of it. So I just encourage you to get more educated about it so that you cannot get caught up in the American rat race. Learn about it, Bitcoin. If you don't know anything about it, go to the bitcoin.com channel. They have a Bitcoin 101 playlist. Learn about it and learn the difference between Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies. And I'm going down to El Salvador at the end of June to see this for myself. I'm going to interview people for this show. You're going to be a bunch of clips. We'll probably do a live stream from down there. And I want to really show people what is going on there and see it for myself. I want to see for myself, because when the American media is deliberately not talking about it or just painting it as El Salvador is going is crazy and awful, then I really want to see for myself. That's why I went to Russia in 2019 and I did the documentary Graham Goes to Russia, where I saw that country for myself, because I've been lied to about Russia since my whole life. And I made the documentary Graham Goes to Russia, which is available at rockfin.com. /Graham Elwood on the premium level. It's the only place you can watch it. I went to Afghanistan as a comedian, so I got to see what being in a war zone was like. So I'm going to go down there with a camera and report and see what I can find and talk to people and see for myself. And my guess is I'm going to see why American media and banks and everybody in the Liz Warrens and out of touch boomers like Bill Maher, why that crowd is so wrong and deliberately misleading us on Bitcoin in El Salvador. Follow the money, connect the dots, get the truth. Support what we do at GrahamElwood.com, you guys, so I can keep bringing this content to you. I'm doing this for you. This is the people's channel. You're the best, most smartest audience in the world. And thanks for supporting what we do. We're going to make Gotham great again, guys, and shave your knuckles for justice. Boom. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. We are still in our 9th month of demonetization from YouTube. So support what we're doing at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. It's free to sign up, and there's a premium level at $10 a month. And for that, you get everybody on the platform's premium content. Myself, Lee Camp, Ron Placone, Jimmy Dore, Whitney Webb, Kim Iverson, Abby Martin, and many, many others. You can also support what we're doing at Venmo at Graham-Elwood, and go to grahamelwood.com. We have a PayPal button and a PO box. I also have crypto wallets, which are all in the show notes. Thanks for supporting what we do.